Today, we go back to the late winter of 1843, to a suburb in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, right on the Delaware River. For here, in a small house, with his mother-in-law Maria and wife Virginia, Edgar Allan Poe was surely reading The Pioneer, a popular literary and critical magazine of the time which was carrying the publication of his work, A Telltale Heart. Poe was certainly not the most popular author of the time, even within his own genre. So what is it exactly that made Edgar Allan Poe and his work so famous? How is it that he has become one of the greatest American authors to have ever lived? For that, we have to look at what set him apart of the other Gothic writers during his lifetime: form and style. His critical background gave him a careful eye for what later became identified as his two cardinal rules for writing short stories. The first, they must be short enough to read in one sitting. And the second, every word must contribute to the story. By mastering these rules, Poe commands the reader's attention and rewards them for an intense and singular experience through what he called the unity of effect. Poe's tone of voice transcends fear, using violence and horror to explore the paradoxes and mysteries of love and grief and guilt, among other themes, or resisting simple interpretation by his audience, or any clear moral message at the end of each story, leading the reader to wonder for themselves, what are the hints and implications towards these supernatural elements supposed to mean? May a reader wonder long enough, they will find that the true darkness behind the curtain is the labyrinth of the human mind and conscience itself, as well as its propensity for self-destruction. For example, in The Telltale Heart, there is a terrible murder that is juxtaposed by the killer's tender empathy towards their victim, the old man, a connection that returns to haunt them and ultimately lead to their confection and downfall. We see Poe later will publish another story in 1846 by the name The Cask of Amontillado. Here again we see the use of motifs, paradoxes, and self-sabotage to use an unreliable narrator to turn the reader into an active participant who must decide for themselves whether the storyteller might be lying or just misinterpreting events that they're relating to the reader. This haunting and hypnotic way of storytelling has become the signature use of Edgar Allan Poe's genius, and realistically what makes him one of the most renowned authors in American literature today. Looking further at the analysis, juxtaposition, and comparison between the two stories that we were assigned for this class, A Telltale Heart, as well as The Cask of Amontillado, we see a lot of similarities. And now, using our knowledge of Poe's writing style, we can further analyze the two together as a part of the whole work that he has completed over his lifetime, and give it a new appreciation through the lens of a literary connoisseur. Before we get into these stories together and go over their similarities, I find it important to go over the details of them both individually first. For a brief overview, let us first look to A Telltale Heart. This short story opens with our narrator pleading that they are not crazy. Our unnamed narrator continues on to say that their hearing was just too good in their own defense, that their reason for killing an old man in which they lived with, who themselves remain nameless throughout the story, was that their eyes seemed to scare them enough to move them to murder. a vulture's eye, as they would call it, specifically pointing to a bird of prey as a symbol, a scavenger, foreshadowing disaster or death, as typical in other Poe writings. A vulture's eye is a strange choice because vultures themselves don't have blue eyes. Surely Poe in his story is referring to cataracts, which further insinuates a lack of innocence on our murderer's behalf, as it was an exceptionally common condition for people at that age and time period. The narrator actually goes on in the story to say that he loves the old man, but later enjoys watching him suffer when he watches him wake from sleep and panic in his bedroom, which is very contradictory and unreliable, establishing Poe's other theme of an unreliable narrator, forcing us as the audience to decide for ourselves and make an opinion about exactly who the narrator is and whether we can trust them as a true protagonist, or in reality, the antagonist of the story all along. Another theme in this story is the heartbeat, described like a watch enveloped in cotton, which foreshadows how he is about to smother this old man in his own bedsheets. This theme of a heartbeat being introduced as a watch also introduces the aspect of time into the story, a progression, an inevitability, and in itself a paradox, introducing the final and most relevant theme to most of Poe's works, in my humble opinion. The first paradox being that in attempting to prove his sanity and innocence, our narrator shows us quite the opposite. A caretaker becomes a killer, and the careful, methodical murderer confesses himself at the end of our story. Not his friend, but hating him all along. Montresor is sure that his servants are not home, specifically because he asked them to stay. As well as the theme of Masons, the Freemasons, being expressed figuratively and literally. For both the Freemason as a social group, a fraternity of sorts, being expressed by Fortunato, and then literally by Montresor entombing Fortunato alive with a literal trowel acting as a stonemason in a literal sense. Finally, if we look at these two stories side by side, we see that both are uniquely told from a first person's perspective. Both are self-confessing or self-revealing murderers. Both protagonists carry a belief of innocence through self-justification, and both are a friend turned killer. I hope this has given you your own appreciation for why Poe is such a brilliant writer,